What's up everybody, Nate here, and the debt ceiling bill finally passed in Congress over the last weekend, and that means that the federal government can effectively avoid its $31 trillion in debt, but it also means that the federal government has finally made a decision that massively affects student loans. Now, a lot was passed during the debt ceiling bill, so if you want me to make a full video on that about all of the concessions and how exactly all of that is going to affect you, the investor and average American, let me know in the comments below, and if this video reaches around 50 likes or so, I'll make a full video breaking down the entire debt ceiling bill. But today I want to focus on student loans. Now, the first thing you need to know about the debt ceiling bill and federal student loans is that Congress acted to actually restart the federal student loans program starting 60 days after June 30th. So that means anybody who has federal student loans now has to start making payments again 60 days after June 30th. I want to go over how the student debt problem affects Americans, because if you think that this debt problem actually only affects the people who took out federal student loans, well, you've got another thing coming, because this is a $1.6 trillion issue and it trickles down to just about everyone. There are over 43 million people in the United States who have $1.6 trillion in federal student loan debt. In fact, the federal government's biggest asset and its biggest moneymaker is in federal student loans. That is exactly why it was brought up during the debt ceiling bill, because the United States federal government is trying to pass a lot of legislation, and they have previously passed a lot of legislation before. So one of the biggest ways that they make money is getting payments from federal student loans. But over the last couple of years, they have been pretty much receiving nothing in federal student loan payments. The federal government sort of paused a lot of payments and put a lot of mandatory payments like mortgages and rent and federal student loans in forbearance for the pandemic, because we had millions of people in unemployment. So people couldn't afford their loans anymore, and that meant that the entire economy had the potential to shut down very quickly. So the federal government stepped in and made it so a lot of people didn't have to pay those loans. Not to mention we had things like stimulus, and we had a lot of other government spending bills and additional unemployment benefits, you name it. So there was a lot of money sort of floating around our economy, but in particular, millions of Americans did not have to make payments on their federal student loans. That's exactly what forbearance means. You have optional payments, and during those times, those loans were not accruing any interest. So that means people could make interest-free payments, and a lot of Americans decided to do that. But not all of them, as around 60% of Americans who have federal student loans were not making any payments during this time. Now, the reason that this is one of the biggest assets for the United States federal government and one of the biggest money makers for them is because they have been collecting federal student loans for the past 20 or 30 years or so, because in the 1990s and early 2000s, the federal government came out with a program that they were going to basically pay for anybody to go to school. The federal government had the ideology that they wanted a lot more Americans to be highly educated so that way they could get the jobs of the future. But the problem is school was getting a lot more expensive because it was getting a lot more in demand. So people couldn't afford to go to school, and that meant that you had an entire economy of workers who was not going to be highly educated enough to keep up with the rest of the world and to keep America number one. So that meant that the federal government wanted to give every single person the ability to borrow money to go to school. But like I said before, this has now sort of spiraled into a $1.6 trillion problem. Now, over the last couple of years, it hasn't been such a big issue because, like I said, during the pandemic, people didn't have to make payments anymore. But now they're going to have to make payments, and the economy of today is very much different than at the start of 2020 before everything sort of hit the fan. We now have really high inflation and a slowing economy, and on top of all of that, Americans have not had to make those payments, so a lot of people have been paying off other things or taking that income and using it to buy pretty much anything that they wanted to. That was a stimulus measure by the Federal Reserve and the federal government, because now people had hundreds of dollars in their income freed up to do whatever they want. But that is now going away, and people are going to have to start paying those loans back regardless of the economic conditions. Now, the average federal student loan debt for each borrower is around $32,000, which means people are paying around $350 to a little over $500 every single month just to pay off their federal student loans. And right now, when we have wages sort of stagnating, inflation, and a slowing economy with the potential of unemployment to go up, this could have disastrous effects for our economy. But in the federal government's eyes, not having people return those payments and not having people pay those loans anymore also has disastrous effects, because the federal government is in a tax deficit, which means the only way that it can pay its bills is if it gets more tax money or if it prints a lot more money, and we already have really high inflation, so the Federal Reserve can't simply just print more money. But people also don't want to be taxed a whole lot more either, because that takes away from their income too. So one of the only ways that they can get that money back is by bringing back the federal student loan program and making people make those payments again. This has become a very complicated issue in the United States because there is sort of a huge discrepancy between people who want federal student loan payments to be completely forgiven by the federal government and people who would be extremely outraged and upset if the federal government forgave thousands of dollars in student loan debt for every single borrower. President Joe Biden last year proposed forgiving around $10,000 to $20,000 for every single federal student loan borrower, which would sort of have a big effect and a big impact on our economy because a lot more people would have a lot more money to spend. That would essentially stimulate the economy a lot, but I think what a lot of people forget about is stimulating the economy very quickly can also cause inflation to go up too, because now you have people who have a lot more money buying a lot more things, because remember, they have around $300 to $500 in extra income to spend because they don't have a lot of those loans anymore. But like I said, there is a whole group of people that want federal student loan payments to be completely forgiven. My generation of millennials feels that they were completely taken advantage of when they were growing up when it came to college and taking on student loan debt. My generation was basically taught that you had to go to school and you had to get a degree in order to be financially successful. There was never a moment where I thought that if I didn't go to school, I was going to have financial success. That was the path that I was taught. Pretty much everybody in my school and in my high school growing up was taught the exact same thing. You have to go to school and you have to work really, really hard so that way you could get a really, really good job. But I think what a lot of millennials ended up finding out, especially the generation that was graduating college right around the 2007, 2008 area, was even though they have this big expensive degree, that doesn't necessarily translate into a really, really good paying job. I mean, you had people taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt to get a job that was only going to pay them around $40,000 to $60,000 a year. And that ideology has pretty much continued up until the last couple years or so. I think there is a big pushback against these schools now as education online has exploded, as YouTube has exploded. There is an entire generation of people out there that is realizing that you don't necessarily have to go to school to learn all of the same things school is going to teach you. Obviously, there are some careers that you have to go to school for, like if you want to be an engineer, if you want to be a teacher, if you want to be a doctor, you have to go to school to prove that you not only have the knowledge, but you have the skills and experience to do that job really, really well. I mean, you wouldn't want your surgeon to tell you that they went to YouTube University right before they're about to cut you open. That means there's always going to be a need for higher education, and there's always going to be a need for people going to school. But like I said, there is a lot of people who are taking different routes now. There's a lot of people who are going to vocational schools, and a lot of people who are just skipping school in general and learning the skills that they need online in order to be successful in this economy. But then you have the other side, and I completely understand this argument being somebody that has student loan debt myself. There's another group of people that feel like they would be completely cheated out of thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars if all federal student loan payments were forgiven right now, because they have already paid off tens of thousands of dollars of it. So now that means there's going to be a generation of people that basically get off scot-free while they had to pay their way through it. Now that is completely understandable, and they're wondering if they can get some sort of refund if federal student loan payments are completely forgiven, because they already paid theirs off, so they should be able to get some money back because of that. But the bottom line here is that total general forgiveness of federal student loans is not happening at this point. I mean, there may be some partial forgiveness down the road, but as of right now, there is no bill and there is no exception out there that is going to completely forgive all of your federal student loan payments. And that has pushed a lot of Americans now realizing that they're not going to be able to pay their federal student loans in a few months when they finally restart, into possibly refinancing their loans. And this is going to be a huge payday for companies like SoFi. Banks and other credit unions and financial institutions like SoFi can help you refinance your loans by basically paying off your federal student loan debts and then repackaging a new debt at a lower interest rate for you to pay off. You will now be paying SoFi or another one of these banking institutions instead of the federal government, and more often than not, you're going to have lower payments because, like I said, the interest rate could be a whole lot lower. The issue with this, though, is that interest rates have been rising in the United States. The Federal Reserve has been trying to fight inflation by raising its interest rates, and hopefully that makes it a lot harder for people to borrow money, like getting a mortgage or a car loan or just taking out a personal loan. So that that means that there's a lot less money floating around the economy, and hopefully that brings demand down for everything, and with it, inflation. But that also means that it's harder to refinance things. Like refinancing for mortgages has gone way down, and that means it's going to be a lot harder for people to refinance their federal student loan debt. Ultimately, you might not save as much as you think you're going to, because now interest rates have started to rise, versus if you would have refinanced, say, a year or two ago, you would have got an extremely low interest rate, but you would have also had to restart your federal student loan payments a whole lot earlier. Now, I foresee you're going to have millions of people pile into SoFi and a lot of these other companies and financial institutions trying to have a last-ditch effort to refinance their loans. That can help people in the short term, but I think there is a bigger umbrella issue sort of hanging over all of this, and that is the issue of federal student loans in the first place. Whether you talk about cutting interest rates or forgiving, then you're still going to have people taking out federal student loans. That means the federal government is going to continue to rack up trillions of dollars in payments every single year. And you're going to have Americans forking over hundreds of dollars every single month, which is taking away from their earning and their spending potential. Higher interest rates are just going to make that even harder in the future, because right now the average is around 5 to 6% for federal student loans. But if the Federal Reserve has to continue to raise interest rates higher because inflation is sticking around for longer than they would like, well, that means that it's going to be a lot more expensive for people to take on federal student loans. And it's going to be a lot harder for people to pay them back. That could potentially push more people out of higher education and away from college in general. Or for people who have to go to college and they don't have the money, like if they want to be a doctor, but they don't have $100,000 to put towards a degree, they're going to be the most in-debt people in our country. So that is the overall issue that I think our country needs to solve right now. And to be completely honest with you, when I look back, I'm glad that I went to school. I'm glad that I paid for it, because I learned a lot of things that I don't think I would have learned if I didn't go to a college. College gave me sort of the critical thinking skills that I apply on this channel every single day, and that to me is completely invaluable. But honestly, college might not be for everyone, and right now I think it's a really good thing that people are thinking twice about going to school. They're thinking about other avenues that they might need to take. They're thinking, well, maybe I don't even need to get a traditional job. Maybe I'll become an investor. Maybe I'll have a side hustle. There are so many different avenues for people to make money right now that they don't necessarily need to go to school in general. And over the past 20 or 30 years or so, college attendance rates have been going down. So I don't think that this federal student loan problem is going to be an issue forever, but eventually the federal government is going to need to get money from somewhere. So you can expect that to become an issue next. Let me know what you think about this issue. Like I said, this is a very personal issue to me because I actually have federal student loans and I am currently paying them off. So now I am also looking into my options come 60 days after June 30th. But I want to hear from you. What do you think about this federal student loan problem? And do you think that federal student loans should be completely forgiven, or should something else happen that's kind of fair to both sides? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're ready for more business and financial news, talking about everything that's going on in our economy, both at home and across the world, I've got another video ready for you right there. So be sure to check that out before you go. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.